We'll be looking at Ruth Chapter 2 tonight. A couple more weeks in Ruth, and then we'll be on to 1 Samuel. Question number 1 on your handout, of course, deals with some of what we're going to be looking at and discussing tonight. But the question is, what emotions do you usually feel whenever you start a new job? Anybody ever start a new job before? Maybe I should say, anybody ever not started a new job? Maybe that'd be a better question. What are some of the emotions that you experience when you first start a new job?
Anxiety is one of them.
Okay, anxiety, and why is that? Why do you feel that? Yeah, don't really know what to expect yet, right? Don't have an idea. It's not become part of your ordinary routine, your ordinary function. Do you feel any excitement? Should, I think. If you don't, you probably need a different job. But yeah, there should be a little bit of excitement, anticipation, nervousness, a little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety. It's just kind of natural, when you're dealing with the unexpected, to have a full range, I think, of emotions. And the reason that I bring that up is because how do you think Ruth felt? We studied last week how she made the decision to leave her mother and her father and to leave her homeland. And as far as we know, she had never been to Israel before, but to go there and live. Can you imagine that situation? Can you imagine leaving all your family behind and going to a completely different nation and living there? You think there would be any anxiety involved with that? Think there'd be any excitement? Is anybody awake? Yeah, there'd probably be a little bit of everything, I think, wouldn't you? I think she was excited because, this was the God that she'd chosen to serve. And I think she was excited to go there and to see his people and, to get involved with all that. But at the same time, she had to understand, it'd been how long since they'd been, any of their, or at least Naomi, how long had it been since she'd been back to Israel? As far as we know, 10 years. I don't know if she made any journeys in between there, but there's not any indication in the scripture if she did. So she had been far removed from that land, very new to Ruth, and it had to be, kind of like I think it would be for us in starting a new job or something like that. All right, let's go to chapter 2 here. I'm going to read the first 3 verses, then we'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll see how long we have to read some of this. It begins in verse 1. There's a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. So we studied about last week how Naomi's husband Elimelech died. Her 2 sons, they also died. All that she was left with as far as immediate family was her 2 daughters-in-laws. One of them decided to go back home, Orpah. But Ruth decides that she's going to make the journey with Naomi. She's going to stick with her through thick and through thin. She's going to go back and live with her in her country. She's going to be committed to her the rest of her days. So we're introduced here to Boaz. And, it's just kind of not really any background or any history or, anything about this guy. But he suddenly just appears on the scene in the story of Ruth. And, of course, there's a reason why in all of that. But who was Boaz? Let's start with that. What do we learn about him? Okay, so he was a close relative of who? Yeah, Naomi's husband, Elimelech, right? I don't know exactly how close he was, but some kind of close relative.
And we know he's a mighty man of wealth.
Okay, does it hurt to have a rich relative? Anybody have any of those? Are there benefits that come with that? Well, probably. I mean, if you ever get into trouble, right, you might be able to count on that person. I don't know, depending on what kind of individual they are, you might not. But he was a very, very wealthy man, the Bible tells us. Now, as far as his background, the extra credit question here, does anybody know who Boaz's mother was? Yeah, it was Rahab. Rahab the harlot. Remember the story of Rahab and Jericho? How do we know that? Okay, that's a vague answer. Yeah, the Bible tells us. Where do we learn about it, though? Do we learn about it in the book of Ruth?
I think it would be in the genealogy of Jesus. Yes.
Yeah, so if you look in Matthew chapter 1, about verse 5, you'll read about I think it's Salmon, who begets Boaz through Rahab. And so we learn through the genealogy of Christ that Boaz was the son of Rahab. So what do you think about the stock from which he came?
He's definitely a godly man.
Well, he should be, shouldn't he? And just because your parents are godly people, does that automatically ensure that your children are going to be godly people?
A few more verses down, though, kind of gives it away that he is.
Yeah. I think because of who his parents were, that had an effect upon the type of person that Boaz came to be. But he was certainly, we learned there in verse 1 that he was a man of great wealth. What do we learn about him in verses 4 and 5? What do you learn about reading those two verses?
Godly man.
Okay, he's a godly man. How do we deduce that? Okay, part of it is he's a very compassionate individual, right? Why else, though?
It appears he had a good relationship with his servants. He cared about them, and they returned that liking him too. Looks to me like.
Yeah, so like Darrell pointed out there, it seems like his work relationship, very good work relationship, isn't it? I think he respected his workers, and his workers respected him. He greets them there in verse 4 with the greeting, what?
May the Lord be with you.
Yeah, may the Lord be with you. Or may Jehovah, remember if you see those capitals in if you have a version or a translation where it kind of reflects some of the original language, those capitals reflect the Hebrew name for God, which is Jehovah. And so he obviously had some knowledge and some dealings and some interaction and concern about Jehovah, right? He wasn't just using the names or the Lord's name empty. And so it tells you, I think, a little bit about the type of person that he was. So he's wealthy, he's godly, he's a very caring individual. And again, it goes back, when does this story take place? What's the time setting? The days of the judges. And after we studied the judges, I don't want to give the impression that every person that was alive in that day and age was a complete reprobate, because there were still very godly people, weren't there? Still very godly individuals, and I think Boaz is one of those.
Would this be probably would be at the time of Samuel, which was, would that make sense that Samuel was the last judge?
Yeah, it could be. I don't think it gives us an exact time frame, but could be.
Well, just judging by the way it goes through there, it comes into her, and we haven't seen her rise of anything else. Let's see. Her grandson would be David, correct?
Yeah, you have, let's see, you have, Ruth, and then Obed, is he next?
And Obed, Jesse.
And then Jesse and David. So whatever that works out to be, I don't know. My mind doesn't switch gears that fast, so somewhere, but a few generations removed from David. So, you kind of get a picture just reading through this chapter. Again, we're kind of abruptly introduced here to Boaz, but you kind of get a picture of the type of person that he was. And so question number 3 here, in what situation does Naomi and Ruth find themselves? What are they like when they return?
Or church time.
Yeah, they're basically desolate, aren't they? I mean, is there any indication that they had any money? Certainly didn't have any food, did they? So you have to think when Elimelech left, and this is again just kind of deducing from reading the story, but he had to have sold his possession there in Israel, because it wasn't under Naomi's possession when they went back. It had to be redeemed. So that's kind of an indication that he sold it away, probably whenever they left for the land of Moab. And so when they come back, they don't really have any money. They don't really have any food. Don't really have any place that they can call their own. And again, like it or not, they were in a male-dominated society. And what that mean for a woman? Yeah. You know, that, again, whether you like it or not, that's just the reality of the situation that these women lived in. If you didn't have a husband, and you didn't have anything, you were in a pretty dire straits. And so it's a very difficult situation that they're coming into in this particular story. So Ruth decides that she needs to take some action. You know, obviously she doesn't do something, they're going to starve to death. And so what does Ruth, how does she decide to provide for her and for her mother-in-law? Question 4 here. Yeah, so she decides, she actually asked, doesn't she? She asked Naomi if it's okay if she goes out and she begins gleaning in some of these barley fields. Remember, we read it was the time of barley harvest whenever they're returning, so everybody is naturally set about bringing in that harvest. And where would she come up with an idea like that? Okay.
So she must have at least talked about Jewish law and things like that.
Yeah, I think she had to be familiar with the Jewish law, didn't she? I mean, that wouldn't be an idea that just randomly popped into your head. Hey, I think I'll go out here in somebody else's field and pick some grain today, you know? But she knew. Go ahead.
Did she have learned it from her husband?
She could have. Yeah, could have very well.
Wouldn't the sons of Naomi have been, for lack of a better term, practicing Jews?
Yeah, should have been, at least.
It doesn't say one way or the other, so you kind of draw the assumption that they must have been faithful Jews. So I'm assuming she learned a lot of Jewish custom and the way things worked from her husband before he died.
Yeah, so there was, again, there's an indication. I think when you read the story, the implication is she's a follower of Jehovah. I mean, that's part of the reason why she wants to come back. She wants Naomi's God to be her God. But there had to be at least a little bit of knowledge of this law in existence. And turn over to Leviticus chapter 23 real quickly here. Let's just read a couple of verses and talk a little bit about this law. Somebody read Leviticus 23 and verse 22. And if I can, somebody else look up Deuteronomy 24, 19 through 22. Deuteronomy 24, 19 through 22.
23, 22.
Yes, sir.
And when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field that thou reapest, neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of the harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the strangers. I am the Lord your God.
Okay, so whenever God gave the law of Moses, some of the provisions that he saw fit to put within the law had to do with providing for those who didn't have the ability to provide for themselves. People that were in this situation like Naomi and Ruth. One of those laws involved the corners of the fields. Whenever they harvested their fields, they were supposed to leave the corners, and that was for those who were poor, those who didn't own property, those who didn't have fields, those who didn't have anything to eat, so they could come out there and glean those corners. Yes, sir?
The idea was you had to go get up yourself, though.
Yeah.
You had to go get that stuff.
Yeah, was it a welfare system?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a working welfare system, wasn't it? That was kind of the kicker too. There was food available for you, but you had to go out and get it. And so God saw fit within his law. He made these provisions. We read there in Leviticus 23, it was for the poor here and the stranger. So sometimes you would have these foreigners who had proselyted, to the Israelite faith, but they didn't possess land within Israel. They didn't have the means to grow their own crops and have their own harvest. And so that would have been what they relied upon in order to survive. Let's do Deuteronomy. It was more than just the fields, though. Let's do Deuteronomy 24:19 through 22.
When thou cuttest down thine harvest in the field, and hast forgot a sheaf in it, it shall be for the stranger, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that the Lord of thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hands. When thou beatest thine olive tree, thou shalt not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. When thou gatherest the grapes of thy vineyard, thou shalt not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondsman in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command thee to do this thing.
Okay, so there were some certain laws involving the harvest. One of them we read about was the corners of the fields. Another one was if you forgot to bring a sheaf in, you didn't look out there in the field and say, oh, we forgot that one. You left it behind. God said you leave that for the poor, for the stranger, for the widows. The fatherless are also one of those that are mentioned there. Whenever they shook the olive trees, kind of like, I don't know how many like to shake walnut trees, but if you ever want to harvest most of your walnuts, you climb up the tree and shake it. You try to get as many as you can. Do you get them all? No, not unless you're really good, I guess. But usually there's some that's left over. God said you shake your olive tree one time. Okay, and that's it. And then you leave the rest that falls for the poor and the stranger. When you went and picked your vineyards, you didn't go over it again and again and again. You picked it one time. And then what was ever was left, if it wasn't ripe at the time you were picking, then it was allowed to ripen. And then the poor and the strangers and the widows and the fatherless were allowed to come get it. So God had these provisions within His law to provide for those who were in the very situation that Naomi and Ruth found themselves. Now, again, what I find it interesting is who came up with this idea? Okay, but I'm talking about in the story of Ruth. Ruth does. So my question is this, just thinking question, why didn't Naomi come up with the idea? Okay. Okay, so she obviously doesn't do a whole lot, which kind of indicates her physical condition. Anything else you might think of? Okay, so she wasn't really, she's kind of in a dark place, isn't she? I think whenever you read about her in chapter 1, she's maybe in some depression and things like that, and she just thinks her life is quickly going downhill, doesn't she?
When you read later on, it talks about the young men, the young women. So I think the younger generation was the ones that went out and did this work.
Okay. What about, and this is just kind of a think about it idea, do you think there were any dangers involved in this?
For a female, for sure.
He wanted the word of God to go. And so I think for a young woman by herself, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't.
Especially a stranger.
Right. A foreigner with no rights, nobody there to defend her, a young woman at that. We're talking about the time of the judges. Remember some of the things that took place. So I don't know if that had anything to do with why Naomi didn't mention it to Ruth. I just know that she came up with this idea, and it's interesting to me that Ruth is the one who actually suggests it, to take advantage of this law of God.
Could there be something also to the fact that, and I don't know that Moab's not that far away, but, maybe it was so bad in Moab that she knew a little bit that there was a welfare system, if you want to call it that, in the Israelite deal, where there wasn't in Moab, as far as I know.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I just find it maybe absolutely nothing. I just find it interesting that it kind of unfolds in that manner. Yes, sir.
Mentioning the dangers for her, verse 9 very clearly gives indication of how dangerous it is. Because he's rich and wealthy and all these people work for him, and he's like, and I have instructed my men not to touch you.
Yeah.
So clearly for him to make a point of saying that is to put her at ease, because elsewhere that would be the case.
Yeah, and two, do you think that every wealthy landowner in Israel would have been good and fine with a complete stranger showing up to start taking stuff off their land. I imagine there were some hazards involved in that, just in and of itself.
He seemed to be very well informed
Yes.
in this story. Don't you think?
Yeah.
He knew who she was, he knew who Ruth was, he knew who Naomi was. Of course, he would know her anyway, but he knew all this stuff, and seemed that he knew what was going on. He seemed very well.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a couple reasons why. Bethlehem, Judah wasn't like a giant city like we would think of today. It was a relatively pretty small city. And so, somebody coming back like that, and he was related to him, I mean, that kind of, I think, comes into the picture. But I think naturally the whole town knew. Remember, there's a stir in the whole town whenever she comes back. But he was very well informed, wasn't he? He was very knowledgeable about what was going on there. So she decides she's going to take advantage of these laws, and she's going to use them to help provide for herself and for her mother-in-law. So we read a little bit about Boaz comes back. He's away on business. He comes back. He sees her working in his field, and he asks his foreman about Ruth. And so question number 5 here is how does his foreman, Boaz's foreman, describe Ruth? What are some things he says about her?
Well, he mentioned she's a Boaz.
Okay, so he mentioned that she was a stranger, right? That was important. Why? Who was this law for?
It's for strangers and it's for the poor. So, he was letting him know that
Yeah, if anybody qualified for this program, I'll just call it that for lack of a better term. But yeah, she was actually, there's 4 categories that we read about: poor, stranger, a widow, and fatherless. Those were the 4 categories. So she hits 3 of the 4 categories. She's a stranger, she's poor, and she's a widow. And so if anybody needed this law, it would have been Ruth at that particular time. So he describes her as a Moabite. What else?
That she traveled with Naomi.
Okay, yeah. So she came back from the country of Moab with Naomi, right? She voluntarily came of her own accord to take care of Naomi. What else? She was a worker, wasn't she? Yeah. So people, whenever they saw her out there, he said that she started in the morning and she's kept on until the evening. She only took a break, to eat, I think, or maybe take a rest or something like that. But she'd work throughout the entire day. Any other thing?
She asked permission to.
Yeah, verse number 7 there, she didn't just walk out there in the field and start taking this food, although that was a law of God, wasn't it? I mean, did she have to go ask permission, or should she have had to go ask permission? Not according to God's law, right? But she did. And so it tells you a little bit again about, I think, the type of individual that she was. She wanted to make sure it was okay before she went out here and started doing this, even though there's supposed to be this universal divine law in effect. And of course, she did it all day long. And there's some other verses there, verses 10 and 13. What do you learn about her character from those verses?
She was humble.
She was. She's a very humble individual, wasn't she? What else?
She shared her own life, what had happened to her. With Boaz, she wasn't keeping any secrets from him.
Okay. Yeah, she's very open in what she was doing, of course. One of the things that stands out to me is she really thankful that Boaz has given her this opportunity? I mean, a lot of people today, if there was a law in effect, would they feel like, hey, I deserve this? This is something that's owed to me. Would they be thankful or grateful whenever that law was fulfilled? Probably not. But Ruth was a person who, even though it was a law, she understood just how gracious Boaz was being and letting her do this, and of course providing some other things for her too along the way. So again, it just, I think, a reflection of the type of individual or character that she had. So question number 6 here, how would you describe Ruth's treatment on her first day of work? Yeah. Let's do the first part of number 7 here. What specific instructions does Boaz give to Ruth, which tells a little bit about the way she was treated? Okay. Basically, he gave her permanent permission, didn't he? He said, you can come here anytime, all the time if you want. Don't go anywhere else. Everything that she needs right here. Don't have to ask permission anymore. Anytime you're welcome to come and to do this. What else?
Leave the young man, leave her alone, and she could also drink the water that they had already drawn.
Yeah, so there's several additional benefits that Boaz extends to her that were beyond what the law of God required for a person in this situation. First of all, he told everybody to watch out for her. She was protected, basically. So, to glean in somebody's field and to know that people are, watching over you and protecting you, that would be another great benefit in that day and age. One of the other things that Danny mentioned there was he told her, if you get thirsty, go get a drink of water. These young men have drawn this water, they're my servants and they carried them up here. If you want to drink, you just go get a drink, any time you want. What about her food? Where'd she eat?
With them.
Yeah, she actually got to eat with the workers, didn't she? And with the house of Boaz.
He also told the servants to grab big handfuls, but if they drop, don't pick them up, let them come behind you. So it's like,
Yeah.
She got an extra dose.
Yeah, so he even allowed her, he said, let her go in between the sheaves. A lot of times the people would have said, you stay back till we pick up the sheaves, but she was allowed to just walk in and out of them, and, he said, purposely drop some and make sure she gets enough. So, the point that I'm making is Boaz, he wasn't just doing what the law required, right? He was going above and beyond what God had asked when being gracious and sharing the blessings that God had given them with other people. So again, kind of reflection of Boaz here too. Let's see. So question number 7 here, how does she respond to Boaz?
Why?
Yeah, she was surprised. She's shocked, I guess would probably be a better word. And she couldn't understand why Boaz would treat her like that, right? Because who was she? She was a foreigner. Okay? She wasn't a fellow Israelite. She wasn't really his blood relative. She was his relative through marriage, but not really a blood relative. And so in her mind, she just can't fathom how Boaz could treat a total stranger, with such kindness as what he bestowed upon her. Do you have a comment?
I was thinking, Boaz was a wealthy man. Back in those days, your wealth came from managing people, usually, and you build a big workforce. Evidently, he recognized and appreciated good people. And in verse 8, or verse 11, he says, it's been reported to me what all you did for your mother-in-law, and that impressed him so much that he took special attention to her and treated her special because of what she had done.
Yeah, and that's actually one of our questions here, question number 10. The reason that Boaz gave for his special attention to Ruth, it was the fact, he points out, she'd abandoned her former life. She left her father and her mother, she left her land of nativity, but she did all that to come back with Naomi and take care of her. And that was impressive to Boaz, the fact that she was willing to do that. So he wanted to help in any way that he could, and he realized that she had more than just her own mouth to feed too. But she was surprised, even shocked at how kind he was to her being a stranger. And does it matter the way that we treat other people? Do they take notice of that?
Sure.
Yeah. And as Christians, should people see a difference in the way that we treat them versus the way that the world treats them? Yeah, there should be a tremendous difference, shouldn't there? And Boaz his interaction with Ruth is one of those, it's more like, a person would treat his close friend or, like his son or his daughter. So it was just impressive to her, again, the type of individual that Boaz was. Question number 8. So what dangers did Ruth face in gleaning the fields? What are some that are specifically mentioned? I think there's really only one that's really hammered in here, but
none after Boaz extends his protection to her. I mean, it implies that she was at risk of being raped or even something as simple as someone else who's gleaning coming and smacking her and taking what she's gathered.
yeah.
So basically rape and robbery.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of debate. A lot of commentators find that idea offensive, but hey, sexual assault was not uncommon in that day and age. Remember some of the stories we read in the Judges? So you read there in verse 9, he commanded the young men not to touch her. You go down to verse 15, he also told them, don't reproach her. Don't be making fun of her, or don't try to keep her from doing what she needs to do here. Don't impede her in any way. And so there were some real dangers that she faced. Again, it was the time of the Judges. Unfortunately, not everybody was a godly individual in that particular time, but there were very godly people like Boaz and Ruth. So what sacrifices did she make? I think we kind of covered that already. To stay with her mother-in-law. Question 9, she left her family, her mother and father, left her homeland behind. What words of blessing does Boaz offer to Ruth? Question 11 here. How does he describe what she's done there in verse 12?
She's going to be fully rewarded.
Okay. He said, you've come to take refuge under the wing of God, right? And God's going to provide for you. God's going to take care of you. And again, that's kind of an indication, I think, of Boaz, the type of individual he was. But he also understood, how does God extend his blessings to other people? Did God just come knocking on her door and drop her a bushel basket of barley? Okay, faith is certainly one of those things that she had to have, didn't she, to go here and to do those things.
That's where I was gonna go before you went there, was that 12 also proves what a godly man he is also, by, him showing that, what God will do for you with, your trust and faith, and then her also, and her knowing the law, obviously, had to have trust and faith also to have all this to come to fruition.
Yeah, and so he wanted to show her, again, people get rewarded for trusting in God, don't they? I mean, if you're going to come serve God and you're going to put your faith and your trust in Him, you're going to make this long journey and leave everything behind, you're going to be rewarded. Okay, it's not all going to be for nothing. But I think one of the great things about Boaz is, even though he's a very wealthy man, where did he understand all those things came from? Listen, everything we have belongs to God, doesn't it? I mean, it's not ours. We're just stewards over those things. And so he saw those things in his possession as extensions of God's blessings. And he was willing to share them and, of course, use them in a way that would help and benefit other people too, not just himself. Let's see here. So you read the rest of the story, read verses 17 through 23. You'll read about Ruth coming home to Naomi. How much did she bring home the first day? Yeah, anybody know what that is?
Bushel sound.
A bushel? Okay, so how much is a bushel? Does that help anybody?
53 pounds if it's barley.
Okay, so it's somewhere in the, what it said. It said about an ephah, that's anywhere from what I could deduce and deduct. It's ranging anywhere from about 30 pounds to 52, like Dennis pointed out, is probably good commentary there. 52 pounds.
I used to run a great deal. So.
Oh, okay. So you measured in ephahs, huh?
Yeah, we had some farmers
I'm just giving you a hard time.
an acre.
Yeah. So, that was enough for 2 women. I mean, could you imagine like a 50-pound bag of flour, bringing that home? That's enough for 2 to 3 weeks for these women to live off of. So it was she was just blew her away. And she knew something had to be up, right? Because that's not normal. It's not normal for a person to go out there and just be picking up scraps and bring home a 50-pound sack of flour. It doesn't work in that manner. And so she naturally wanted to know what had happened. And of course, Ruth goes through the story and explains to her the events of the day and everything that unfolded. So question 14 here, how does Naomi respond to Ruth's success? She's excited about the food, right? But what do you think she's most excited about as you go through that?
Meeting Boaz.
Yeah, Boaz. Because who is Boaz? What does she say about him?
He's a kinsman.
Yeah, he's my version says in verse 20, our close relative. And what did that mean? What did a close relative mean for them?
Potential husband.
Okay, there was again part of the law of Moses. There was an idea throughout the law of Moses of a kinsman redeemer. Okay, and that was your close relative could redeem you. And that was true in several instances. It was true in the case of murder. It was the job of the close relative to redeem them, to take care of the situation. If you sold yourself into slavery, your close relative could come and pay whoever you sold yourself to and buy you back. He could redeem you. If you sold your land, one of your close relatives could come and pay what you sold that land for, and they could redeem your land and give it back to you. And so what Naomi is most excited about is this is our kinsman redeemer. This is a wealthy guy, like we said, starting out, who can get us back on the right track, who can buy back Elimelech's land, in the process, marry Ruth, raise up children, put the family name back on it, and then there would be a lineage and possession for them throughout the rest of their. So basically that nearest relative, his job was to take care of the weak family members. If there was a family crisis that arose or a hopeless situation, they could come and redeem or buy back some of the difficulties that they were experiencing. So it ends with advice from Naomi to Ruth. What advice does she give her? What does she say in verse 22?
Basically, stay in Boaz's field.
Yeah, she said, this is great. And one commentator, I kind of laughed because he said this is the first time you hear Naomi use the word blessed. All this time she's been cursed. God's been against her. Everything's going downhill. But now all of a sudden she sees a glimmer of hope. She sees a ray of sunshine, an opportunity for things to improve.
She was so bitter. Didn't she change her name to like Mara or something for a bit?
Yeah, like I said, she had some issues that she was dealing with.
There for a while, so.
Yeah, and she had a rough life. I mean, she's going through some pretty difficult situations too, so understandably. All right, so anybody got any thoughts or comments there? Ruth chapter 2.
That's kind of the reason why God wants us to seek first the church, and we take care of our own. We love each other, and we take care of our families.
Yeah, that same kindness that Boaz had, we should surely have for, like you said, our brothers and our sisters in Christ, but also the compassion for the world too. But like you said, it starts at home, doesn't it? It starts within the family first.
Something I take from this is, the saying everybody says, God helps those who help themselves. If you're just sitting on the curb and not trying to do nothing, nothing's going to happen. And I think this is a really good example because if Ruth had not been industrious, polite, humble, willing to, hey, may I? And then if she wasn't out there working, this guy was a businessman. Like you said, I think he saw she's a hard worker. She's driven to do what she needs to do. And I think that is part of why she gets rewarded, is seeing that in versus if she went out there just kind of for me, I don't think she would have responded the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's certainly a principle taught within God's law. You know, if you want things to work, you got to take action. It's not just a sit back and wait kind of a deal. So